So what are you here to talk about to us today, Caleb? What do you do? And give us a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, for a few years since 2011, I think it was, I started a local history blog. And I also, in the past few years, have been writing some local history books as well about Ipswich. And so Jeremy and Suzanne kindly invited me on to sort of chat a bit about, local history,
yes,
about the books that I've written, and about sort of the well-being, the well-being aspect of working on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what is it about Ipswich? What is interesting about Ipswich? What kind of draws you to it, other than kind of maybe being a local?
Well,
person?
I think the thing is, with a country like the United Kingdom, it's got such an ancient recorded history that anywhere you are in the country is interesting, actually. And Ipswich is no exception to that. So if you start digging into it, if you look into more than 1,000 years of history of a town with thousands of people living there throughout that time, there's always going to be interesting stories wherever you are. And Ipswich is just where I happen to be. And I think, like a lot of people, my hometown and my local community is, a place that I want to find out more about. And so after I graduated from university, where I studied history and politics, I stopped writing essays, and I had a job where I didn't really have to use my essay writing skills and so on that I developed at uni. So something that I wanted to do in my spare time was start writing about history again, because I missed it. And so I came upon the idea of writing a blog, so that there was a purpose for what I was doing. And that I decided the best thing to do for that was to give it a theme. So I chose local history, which is where I was, in Ipswich. So that's kind of how it all got started for me in 2011.
So how do on the blog? First of all, is it open to anybody to read or listen to?
Yeah, it's completely free to look at. There's no paywall or anything. I wish there was. It's research that I do that I sort of find a home for, really. So when I'm sort of trawling through different history books or something, I'll maybe find an interesting article or an interesting fact, and I'll think, okay, well, let's find out more about that. And the thing that I really like about local history is that the answer isn't there for you on the internet. You can't do a Google search and find out the answers to the questions that you find. So that means that you have to go and research it.
Yes.
You're under the radar.
You are a bit, yeah. So and it's I find it quite satisfying. I mean, to kind of find out the answers to things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find a thread and follow it, and maybe at the record office or through books and articles or newspaper online, that sort of thing.
Is Ipswich quite an old town, is it? Because Colchester's the oldest, isn't it, in the UK?
Yeah, so Colchester, it's one of those things where lots of towns and cities claim to be the oldest, don't they? But I think what we can say, Colchester is the oldest recorded town, because obviously it was around in Roman times. It was the capital of England then, or what was kind of England then. But Ipswich, you can kind of say, is the oldest continually inhabited town, because Colchester was sacked by Boudicca. So people weren't living there the entire time from Roman times to now. Ipswich, it's difficult to put an exact date on it, but it's over. I think that the clearest thing you could say is it's a little over 1,500 years old, that people have been living here consistently.
And of course, we're not the only Ipswich in the world. There are loads of them.
There are.
But we are the one we were the original, weren't we?
We were, indeed. So the name has moved around. There's one in Australia, there's one in America. I think there's two in America.
There is two in America, yeah.
And the one in Massachusetts in
near Boston.
Yes, that would have been probably originally populated by people from Suffolk, really, because they took a lot of the names from this area over with them, and East Anglia was sort of a hotbed of Puritanism and things like that was happening in America at that time. People were going over from England to there. So,
but the way Ipswich grew up, because originally it was called Gipp's Wake, wasn't it? Yeah,
there's a lot. Well, the thing with this again is that you have obviously written records. Pronunciation is another thing that's impossible to be known for sure, but they think it's. I mean, I think from what I've read, that it's kind of quite a soft G, so it's sort of more like Ipswich or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different theories about where that name came from, whether it was the River Gipping, whether it was the person who founded the town might have been called Yipper. which is the Old English for yawn.
Yeah.
So some people will say that Ipswich's name comes from the fact that it was named after this person who had a characteristic of yawning a lot.
Yeah. so Sleepy Town something.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. Yeah.
I'm just wondering. I was reading a bit on the net on your blog about Thomas Wolsey and the kind of Cambridge. Would it be true that we would have had kind of an equivalent of Cambridge University here? We haven't got University College Suffolk, of course, but...
Yeah, well, that's interesting. If you want to know more about that, you should go to Christchurch Mansion at the moment, because there's an exhibition about Thomas Wolsey that some of my colleagues have put together there at Ipswich Museums, and that's really worth going to. So that's the plug for Ipswich Museums. Basically, Thomas Wolsey, before he fell from power, he was obviously the second most influential and important person in the country, really.
Yeah.
And he was planning to have a feeder college that was based in Ipswich to feed into his college at Cambridge, I think it was. I can't remember if it was Oxford or Cambridge off the top of my head.
Okay.
My blog will probably tell you if you want to have a look on there.
Okay, yeah, good.
But essentially, the reason for that was that he was very keen to promote education in England at the time, and he was really ahead of his time. He was encouraging his teachers and tutors to avoid beating the pupils, which was common then.
Yes.
He was saying that he was very ahead of his time in saying that actually education should be about enjoyment, which is a very advanced way to think about education 500 years ago.
Exactly.
And he wanted to establish that in Ipswich. And it is tempting to think that over those hundreds of years we would have had something maybe of the equivalents grow up of Cambridge or Oxford in Ipswich, but obviously, as a lot of people know, the story goes that he didn't manage to secure the divorce for Henry VIII,
No, he didn't.
So that he could marry Anne Boleyn, and so he fell from favour, and eventually, he's ended up in an unmarked grave in Leicester somewhere.
Exactly. And also around that area, around the area where the Wolsey Gate is, which was going to be the entrance, wasn't it? At the
It's interesting because the waterline was in a different place than it is today.
Yes.
So although that is a gate on the land today, it would have been right on the edge of the river when it was intended to be used. So it would have just been kind of a side river entrance.
Yes.
So it's the last sort of fragment that we've got.
Of what Thomas Wolsey did. The other thing about Ipswich was it was surrounded by 4 gates, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Ipswich did have gates, as you say, and people often talk about the town walls.
Yes.
But I think the town walls really amounted to kind of soil ramparts.
They were.
But then we had sort of brick and stone gates that surrounded with kind of just sort of mounds rather than
and walls. And I feel my favourite one has to be when I've seen the pictures of the Westgate. That is a really if you can find out, if you can get any pictures of that, it's really. And also you had the Lady Lane statue as well, didn't you? Which connects us with Italy, is it?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So the story behind Lady Lane is another fascinating one. You go down Lady Lane now, and it's a tiny little street that kind of, to be honest, it looks pretty ugly. It's not a particularly nice lane.
No.
But it was the site of one of the most important sites of pilgrimage in the country, and in Western Europe, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's really fallen completely from grace because now people use it as just a little cut through, between shops, really.
They do, yeah.
But there was a statue there
of
the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
And during the Reformation, that was going to be, it was taken down. It was sent to London to be burned.
Yes.
But there's a story that it was actually saved from the fire and sent on a ship out of the country and ended up in, I think it's Nettuno in Italy.
Yeah.
And there are pilgrimages still to one of the churches in Ipswich from Italy, from the town where it now supposedly is, but it's not 100% sure.
Coming to the present, you're actually you're writing a new book now, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I'm currently, so I've written a couple of local history books about Ipswich.
Yep.
And I'm currently writing one that's called, or was going to be called, Ipswich in 50 Buildings.
Right.
So, as the title suggests, that's me basically doing research about 50 different buildings in Ipswich. So, from the really obvious ones, like Christchurch Mansion and Ancient House and that kind of thing, to some of the more obscure ones maybe that have got interesting stories, but perhaps aren't so well known.
Exactly, yeah.
I guess, what's your kind of approach to history? 'Cause some people like the kind of great men and the great women of history, the kind of the grandstanding. I suppose what you're doing is kind of, you said under the radar. And what's your approach? Because there's lots of different ways of going about
The
what
thing
you do.
that attracts me is social history. I
Yeah.
like to find out about how people lived in the past, and I'm less drawn to the really powerful kings and queens, stuff like that. I do find that stuff interesting,
Yeah.
but I like to sort of try and explore what was going on for ordinary people. That's
Yeah.
what interests me, because that's stuff you don't hear so much about. So I say that attracts me, and I also like finding out. I mean, I've done quite a lot of stuff with old photography.
Yeah.
First book I did was sort of comparing Victorian photographs and stuff to modern day.
Yeah, well,
So
yeah.
I also like architectural stuff and like sort of actually seeing how things have developed and changed. Stuff like
Yeah.
that very
Are
interesting.
you into the landscapes, that
Yeah.
stuff as well?
Yeah, because
Landscape
you can go
history?
back even further from the photographs. Obviously, you've got paintings and etchings and drawings of all kinds of things that you can. It's incredible how quickly things change, and
Yeah.
even in my own lifetime, I've seen the town that I live in change
Yeah.
dramatically. But you really start to get a perspective on how temporary all these buildings are, and that
Yes.
only some things from each age survive. And Ipswich is a great town for exploring that, because it's such a hodgepodge of old and new and in between.
Yes, but but to have the photos there, that is something really special. So there is a kind of not so much a monument, but a memory of that place, and you can actually go in there, go to, and in your mind you can visit it.
Yeah. Well, going back to what you were saying
Yeah.
Matt, about what attracts me, I find it really interesting when you can try and find out something that people don't already know and
Yeah.
bring it to light. Because I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting.
'Cause
And
people-
those are the sort of history books that I enjoy reading, and history podcasts I listen to, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I love those stories where I never knew anything about this, and this really interesting thing happened.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I found out a little snippet somewhere that someone mentioned to me. They asked, "Did I know that Ipswich was the first place to have a blood bank in
Yeah.
the UK?" It was the first place to try it out, and apparently this is to do with the fact that the blood type of sort of native people to Suffolk was the most common blood type and was the most universally used. So it made sense to the first blood bank to be there, so that it would be most effective.
Yes.
And I've only found a couple of mentions of that on the internet. I've been trawled through all kinds of records, and that piece of history is only existing in a few older people's minds now.
Yeah.
And apart from that, it's gone. So I still haven't quite found that out yet, but hopefully one day I'll be able to tell that story.
Yeah.
It's like digging for vinyl. You kind of come across something you
That's
haven't
it. It's-
found for ages.
It's kind of
bring
working in
yeah.
analog in a digital world, isn't it?
Yes. And that's something that's something like treasure hunting. That's amazing. That's amazing. And when you found it,
Treasure hunting is the right word.
Yeah, treasure hunting.
Sorry, term, yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty much it. I know you're a bit stretched for time, and
Yeah, well, that's, it's been really lovely to come
Thank
in.
you for
and
coming
great
in.
to speak to you all.
and you're welcome anytime.
and
Thank you.
and just before you go, you've got a new book out. You maybe mentioned only about 50 buildings. Is that?
Yeah, it's not out for a while yet. It'll
Okay.
probably. I'm kind of hoping for it to be published by the end of 2018. That's the plan.
Okay.
But we'll see how
Look
how
out for
much
that
time I
one.
can make for it and get it done in time.
But also, if you do want to find out any more about it, you can go on your blog. Can't
Yes, I'll quickly tell you the blog address. Yeah, so if you want to read any of the stories that I put on my blog, the address is www.ipswichhistory.wordpress.com.
All right. Thank you very much, Caleb.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.